Che penso?
Cari amici, Fides che figli, Carlo Sirtate, welcome. Presentiamo stasera un interessante volume appena pubblicato di argomento storico che coinvolge direttamente l'isola.
Καλησπέρα κυρίες και κύριοι. Σήμερα παρουσιάζουμε ένα βιβλίο που εκδόθηκε για πρώτη φορά και μιλάει για τη μάχη της Leros και μπλέκει απευθείας στο νησί.
Judy Bickman ha pazientemente raccolto nel corso di numerosi anni, tanto durante i suoi soggiorni nell'isola quanto in tutta l'Inghilterra, una notevole mole di materiale documentativo inerente la partecipazione dell'esercito inglese alla battaglia di Leros.
Η Judy Bickman για αρκετά χρόνια υπομονετικά μάζεψε ό,τι υλικό γνώρισε από την Τουρκία που στο νησί στις επισκέψεις της και στην Αγγλία. Για τη συμμετοχή του Αγγλικού στρατού στην μάχη της Leros.
La sua ricerca si basa, oltre che su documenti ufficiali conservati in archivi e musei sia nell'isola che in Inghilterra, anche e soprattutto su testimonianze dirette e documenti personali dei reduci.
Στην έρευνά της βοηθήθηκε από τα αρχεία και τα μουσεία στην Αγγλία και στο νησί, καθώς και από συνεντεύξεις απευθείας των μετεράτων.
L'8 settembre del 1943 a Leros si trovavano 8.320 tra militari e civili militarizzati dislocati in innumerevoli strutture militari disseminate su tutta l'isola, con massima concentrazione, come tutti sanno, sulle rive del Golfo di Portovalo e nelle 24 batterie di difesa navale e contraerea.
Στις 8 Σεπτεμβρίου του 1943 στο νησί βρίσκονταν 8.000 άντρες μοιρασμένοι στις στρατιωτικές εγκαταστάσεις και στις 24 πληροφορίες του νησιού.
Al loro fianco giunsero a partire dal 17 settembre per cooperare alla difesa dell'isola circa 3.000 uomini, dai Puffs, dei Fogos, dei Ken West, dei Kinzol.
Στις 17 Σεπτεμβρίου προσθέθηκαν σε αυτούς ακόμη 3.000 άντρες του Αγγλικού στρατού.
Di questi uomini, Judy Bickman racconta l'arrivo nell'isola con i primi contingenti, la vita sotto i bombardamenti, le fasi della battaglia, la resa finale, i campi di prigionia.
Για αυτούς τους άντρες μιλάει η Judy Bickman που ήρθαν με το πρώτο απόσπασμα για τη ζωή τους στους βομβαρδισμούς, τη μάχη της Leros και τη φυλάκισή τους αργότερα.
La storia del libro prende le mosse da lontano e sedimentata lentamente nei successivi soggiorni dell'isola per svilupparsi infine con interviste e ricerche d'archivio negli ultimi anni.
Η ιστορία του βιβλίου ξεκινάει από πολύ παλιά, εξελίσσεται στις επισκέψεις της στο νησί και φτάνει μέχρι τα σημερινά χρόνια.
Judy Bickman, autrice di numerosi volumi di argomento storico, è membro della Royal Historical Society e ricercatore associato presso il Birkbeck College dell'Università di Londra.
Η Judy Bickman έχει γράψει αρκετά βιβλία ιστορικού περιεχομένου και είναι μέλος της Βασιλικής Εταιρείας και του Κολεγίου του Λονδίνου, του Πανεπιστημίου του Λονδίνου.
Vorrei pregare adesso il presidente dell'AIAL di fare un breve benvenuto a tutti noi.
Ο πρόεδρος του ΕΙΑ θα προτείνει ένα χαιρετισμό.
Signore e signori, buonasera. A nome mio personale e del comitato direttivo dell'AIAL vi porgo il nostro benvenuto.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας. Εκ μέρους προσωπικά και του Διοικητικού Συμβουλίου του ΑΙΑΛ, απευθύνω ένα χαιρετισμό.
Questa è la prima attività attività estiva del 2018 che fa seguito al Festival del Cinema Italiano che si è svolto a marzo e alla chiusura della mostra Comics all'Istituto Italiano di Cultura che si è svolto alla presenza dei due autori, Vozos greco e Palumbo italiano.
Η παρουσίαση του βιβλίου είναι η πρώτη δραστηριότητα του 2018 μετά από το φεστιβάλ του κινηματογράφου που έγινε το χειμώνα και την έκθεση των κόμιξ που έγινε στο Ιταλικό Μορφωτικό Ιστιτούτο στην Αθήνα.
La mostra che è stata inaugurata a Leros l'estate scorsa, dopo 9 tappe in Grecia, continua il suo viaggio in Italia.
Η έκθεση των κόμιξ μετά από 9 στάσεις στην Ελλάδα συνεχίζει ακόμη το ταξίδι της.
Abbiamo ritenuto molto interessante la presentazione del libro di Julie Pickman che in quanto sulla battaglia di Leros, in quanto ci mostra un altro aspetto, un'altra visione della stessa.
Θελήσαμε να παρουσιάσουμε αυτό το βιβλίο της Julie Pickman για να δούμε από μια άλλη πλευρά τη μάχη της Leros, των Άγγλων.
Allora, vi ringrazio della vostra presenza e spero di rivedervi nelle successive manifestazioni che seguiranno a breve e ancora una volta vi ringrazio e vi auguro una buona serata.
Ευχαριστώ για την παρουσία σας. Ελπίζω να σας δω και στις επόμενες δραστηριότητες που θα μετέχουν.
Adesso vorrei pregare il presidente della Teatro di Amada di dare a suo turno il benvenuto in quanto padrone di casa.
Ο πρόεδρος της θεατρικής ομάδας τώρα, εθνικής χαιρετισμός, σαν έχονται σχόλια στο χώρο.
Καλησπέρα και από εμάς. Καλώς ήρθατε στο θεατράκι μας. Εκ μέρους της θεατρικής ομάδας Λέρο. Είμαστε πολύ ευτυχείς που βλέπουμε γεμάτο το θέατρό μας. Και επίσης είμαστε ευτυχείς που για ακόμα μια φορά συνεργαζόμαστε με το Σύλλογο ΑΙΑΛ και πάντα έχουμε μια εξαιρετική συνεργασία και μια όσο μπορούμε καλύτερη οργάνωση στις εκδηλώσεις που παρουσιάζουμε. Θέλουμε να καλωσορίσουμε και στο θεατράκι μας τη συγγραφέα, την Julie Pickman. Είναι μεγάλη μας χαρά. Και εκ μέρους της θεατρικής ομάδας Λέρο να της ευχηθούμε να είναι καλοτάξιδο το βιβλίο της. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the theater group of Leros, it is their home here. You are welcomed to this event this evening. We are very happy to see you here at our little theater. We are many, but the more the better, don't they say that? It's a great pleasure for us again to cooperate with the Greek-Italian Association in this event. And we want to say to Julie that we are very, very happy to have you here in our home at the small theater in Via Marina. And always a pleasure to cooperate with the IAL, the Greek-Italian organization, on any events. Thank you very much and welcome for tonight.
Ora cercherò di passare la parola all'autrice. Un attimo di problema tecnico qua per spostare.
Τώρα θα αφήσουμε το λόγο στην Julie Pickman.
Una lettona come ένα μικρό tecnico problema, come standard. Oríste? Το μικρόφωνο είναι δικό
First of all, I have to thank all of you for coming. It's absolutely fabulous to see so many people, my Greek friends, my Italian friends, my English friends. Thank you so much. I'm going to start, I'm afraid, with perhaps being a little boring, but it's the thank yous I want to do, because otherwise I forget. I get too excited about the Battle of Leros and I'll go on and on. So bear with me. I want to thank, obviously Enzo and Conchita and the Italian Society for helping organise the event. I want to thank Leros and Irini and all the people at the theatrical group here who've given us the opportunity to get together. But I need to thank people, Tassos Canaris and Yanis Parapapiliaris, for their kindness. They let me visit their all museums, and they were very kind in giving me lots of information which set me off on my journey. I extend my gratitude to Nandas Canis for helping us over many years to help us get the house and to go through the regulations of getting it, and to Anne George and Christina Sikilio for helping me with the Greek translations of interviews of Greek people and for being our family on Leros. My thanks and gratitude have to go to the Lerian community who have supported me in this endeavour. From people who put up posters in the banks, souvlaki bars, pastry shops, people were just so willing to help me. Most of all, I think I've got to thank the people who I interviewed, the Greek people. Nikos Piriavolikos, and forgive my accent as well because my Greek's rubbish. Nikos Drakos, Peter Koulianos, George Papadopoulos, Vespina Tagliabori, and Dimitri Tsuloumas, who is no longer with us, unfortunately. They all gave me great stories. My penultimate gratitude obviously goes to the British soldiers who gave me the most heartfelt stories. They've left us with a legacy of Leros, which we can never forget now because we've got their stories anchored in a book. I hope that I've done them justice. Lastly, but no means least, I've got to thank my husband, Jad Adams, who's put up with me with this obsession for the last 17 years, and has driven me up and down the country when I found my interviewees, my British soldiers. So how did I come to do the book, which I think you probably all want to ask me at some point. I landed in Leros when I was 17, and that was in 1975, but don't do the maths, please. The Turks had invaded Cyprus, Greek Cyprus, the previous year, and war had ensued, and the junta had just fell, so it was a good time. You could actually get here a lot easier. And I landed with a pair of sandals, a sundress, my suntan lotion, and a sense of adventure. And I remember that I went over to Olinda, and I went into the war cemetery on my 18th birthday, and I saw all these graves. And I just thought, my God, what's happened here? And that has always stayed with me. And I think that was when my father died and he left me some money. I bought a place here and my dream came true. So in 2001, that remembrance of my 18th birthday and those men, I knew I'd got to do something. And that was when I actually started doing real research on the book. So, that's how it started. And I'm going to tell you more about the actual book now, because that's probably why you've come. Hitler's Island War is the story of the British soldiers who fought on Leros. I'd like to be on the Greek side, I'd like to be on the Italian side, but my language isn't good enough. I have, however, included all the Greek and the Greek people that I interviewed, obviously, and the Italian side as far as I could. As you know, Winston Churchill was Prime Minister then. Probably Jan will help me here. He was actually in charge of the war effort. This book, though, tells the story of the soldiers themselves, although I do tell about the political situation as well. Mainly it tells the tales of the desperation of the men and how awful it was, but it also tells of great courage at the time. Not just of the soldiers, but of the Greek islanders and how they protected the men here and how they helped them and fed them. As Winston Churchill said, if it were not for the bravery of the Greeks and their courage, the outcome of World War II would be undetermined. I would add, if not for the bravery of the British soldiers, people might have lost hope. The Italians had been occupying Leros since 1912, as most of you know. They'd been holding the islands of the Axis for the first few years of the war. Then, with the surrender of the Italians to the Allies on the 8th of September 1943, the Dodecanese campaign began. Churchill had hoped to rush in and defend the islands before the Germans got there, but most of the war effort was being focused on the invasion of Italy. Eisenhower wanted no diversions. Churchill knew, therefore, that the job in defending the Dodecanese literally had to be done on a shoestring. There was going to be no resources put into it. Churchill sent a letter to General Ismay on the 2nd of August 1943. This was his link to the Chief of Staffs of War. He said, "Can anything be done to find a modicum of assault shipping without compromising the main operation against Italy? It does not follow that troops can only be landed from armoured landing craft, provided they are able to be helped by friends on shore, by the Greek people. A different situation arises. I hope the staffs will be able to stimulate action with enterprises at little cost, though not at little risk." The effort to do this, the answer in it was to bring in the Special Forces. The formation of the Special Forces began with the Special Operations Executive, and they then sprang off into different branches of the Special Air Force, or the SAS, and the Special Boat Squadron, or the SBS. This is a conscious effort to form a union of forces to create maximum havoc for the enemy, but using as few resources as possible. These developments played a significant part in fighting in Greece and its islands from as early as 1940. Their methods were not to attack in force as an army unit, but to raid undetected as far as possible and lay bombs. Their job was to undertake subterfuge behind enemy lines, blowing up airports, harbours, and generally causing mayhem for the enemy. All of these men had an excellent track record in the Middle East and would prove expert in the task of sabotage, fighting, and rescuing in the Dodecanese Islands. Both the SBS and the Long Range Desert Group had undergone rigorous training before they got to Leros, and as you can see, this is a group picture of them all. They trekked over mountains carrying heavy backpacks, and they designed specialist equipment for their actions in the Dodecanese. The people who they were assisted by was the Long Range Desert Group, and they had South Africans and New Zealanders, but it was the New Zealand section of the Long Range Desert Group that came to Leros. They had a good working relationship with the Special Boat Squadron. Lloyd Owen here was second in command of the Long Range Desert Group, and he recalled his time in May 1943, training in the Cedars in Lebanon. He recalled, "We made long and arduous marches carrying 60 and 70 pound packs. We passed nights out in hard and cheerless snow. We struggled with teams of bucking, obstinate, hateful mules, which we had plenty of on Leros when I first came here, and sat daily trying to master the intricacies of the Greek or German languages. And all the time we were getting fitter, and we became daily more able to traverse the flat mountains in fog, in cloud, and in blizzard." And this was all in preparation for coming to Leros. Eisenhower refused to give any air cover, which was to be one of the major impediments of the battle. Bombing would happen from noon until night, and this was to be one of the real huge problems here, because it wore down the soldiers' resolve. A lot of them told me that they got quite demoralised with the bombing when they didn't see even one British aircraft in the sky. Although when I looked at the air records later, I did actually find that some of the Air Force had come here. But it was too far, because our only filling point then was in, our refuelling point was in Cyprus. A top telegram was sent to the Commander-in-Chief from Chief of Staff's Middle East on the 15th of September, relaying a message from Eisenhower, and this is what it said. "We agree that with the resources at present at your disposal, your taking in the Aegean to exploit Italy's capitulation is best possible. It is desirable on political grounds that you should, if operationally possible, include some proportion of Greek troops in forces used for occupation of the Dodecanese when opportunity occurs. We appreciate that you will probably wish to support Greek rebels and encourage civilian morale in Greece. The Sacred Brigade, just before the battle, was actually situated in the mountains in Samos. He continued, "You will realise, however, that such an action would only be carried out at present with resources at your disposal." So again, Churchill's hands were quite tied on who he could actually get there and what he was going to do to help the Greek people. On the eve of the public announcement of the Italian capitulation, there was also already a black outlook for Greece, despite the optimism of its people. The Times on 7th of September 1943 reported from Smyrna on destitute Athens. According to reports reaching here, the morale of the Greek people, stiffened by the Allied victories and by the hope of an early deliverance, is higher than ever, but the physical strain resulting from the scarcity of food and other hardships is again becoming alarming, especially on the Greek mainland and on the islands near to Greece. What they didn't say was that when I got here, I talked to a lot of the elderly ladies, and they said they were living off water from the mountains because supplies weren't getting through, and they had no food. The black market was rife. Prices were reaching astronomical figures for meat and fuel. People were reduced to selling off their homes, furniture, jewellery and clothes in order to buy basic necessities. However, the most significant development in the war in the Greek islands was now about to take place. The race was on for Leros and the Germans, well, between the Germans and the British, to see who would get there first. The first person on Leros, the first British person on Leros after the Italian surrender, was Captain George Jellicoe. He was the leader of the Special Boat Squadron. Moving into Leros, Jellicoe had no inkling of what he might find here, so he just adjusted his plans as he went. His initial idea was to make contact with the Italian governor here, Admiral Luigi Mascherpa, with the aim of getting him to surrender to the British. One of the men employed by the British agents in the Dodecanese at this time was Nikos Viliavolikos, and he is a 96-year-old man now who told me his story with Christina's help, my friend over here. And he said that he'd actually been working for the SBS during the war, transporting supplies and people between since 1941. And he's also started to transport signallers and agents between the Dodecanese, Turkey and Cyprus. He worked with a group of other Greek civilians using a private boat under the direction of the British officers of the SBS. The English officers paid them a wage in gold sovereigns because paper money and Greek currency, no currency was actually acceptable, so only Greek gold sovereigns. And he bought him supplies. Every 15 days, the English officer would fill the boat up with everything they needed for the trip, with food and biscuits and chocolate and other provisions. Viliavolikos was one of the many Greek locals employed in the Royal Navy in the service of the British government throughout the war. And that actually surprised me because I didn't know about this side of the war at all. On arrival, Jellicoe was pleased to find no opposition. He said, this was the welcoming committee, as you can see, Jellicoe's there, second from the left. The Italians on the whole were generally very helpful, perfectly friendly, although not necessarily all that efficient. Sorry, that's what he said. We got a very warm welcome from them. As far as the civilians were concerned, he said, I suppose I was the first British officer there, but they were all extremely friendly. They always were, the Greeks. And Jellicoe became a regular man about Leros on his jeep, trying to find out what was going on and what support we'd get from the Greek people here. And then the next lot to arrive were the long-range desert group. and they were taken by the Greek destroyer Queen Olga from Haifa to Leros, arriving the following day in the middle of the air raid. Major Guy Prendergast, seen here, he's on the right-hand side, had been promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and appointed commander of the Long Range Desert Group, and Major Jake Easton-Smith was appointed his deputy, he on the left. He's actually was killed, Jake Easton-Smith was killed, and he now lies in Leros Cemetery. Once on Leros, Lloyd Owen and his LRDG colleagues were placed under the Royal Command of the Royal Irish Fusiliers. Now these raiding forces, as they were called, the SBS and the Long Range Desert Group, were made up of about 200 men from the Long Range Desert Group, 150 men from the Special Boat Squadron, and 30 commandos with Jellicoe in control and Prendergast as second in command. They had 40mm breeder guns and 5 coastal defence batteries. Each of the 4 6-inch naval guns were Italian. 5 long-range desert patrol groups, and the patrols were sent to cover the gun emplacements which the Italian had previously had, and to support the Italians who were actually manning the post there. The 234th Battalion came to Leros, and this consisted of 4 different groups of troops. The first set of British military troops to land were the Royal Irish Fusiliers, coming in on the 19th of September. This is Ted Johnson, 21-year-old officer. He recalled what happened and what it was like actually being on the harbour in Haifa, not knowing what was happening. He said, "We had no briefing about Leros. The first intimation we had that we were going to Leros was after we'd left Haifa already on the destroyer. Officers were sent for, and we were told by our second in command at the time, who imparted the information to us, that we were going to Leros. And people were saying, what the hell's Leros? And what's Leros all about? We had no briefing whatsoever on why we were going there, or what we'd found there. We had no battle plans. So you can imagine how the men must have felt coming in on Queen Olga and not knowing what was going on. The ground troops arriving on Leros, this is a bit about the makeup of the British soldiers and the 234th Battalion. This is the Royal Irish Fusiliers, all the officers. This was the first group in, and they were known as the Fows as well. There's them, the Queen's Own Royal East Kent Regiment, they were known as the Buffs, the King's Own, and the Queen's Own Royal West Kents. And that was the 4 main groups of people, and we'll get to the maps and I can show you where they were situated. There was also the Durham Light Infantry, which was sent to Kos. The Royal West Kents, most of them went to Samos. There was only initially 1 company here, but during the battle they actually scrambled to get here to try and act as reinforcements. And as I said, the Greek, I think there was a missed opportunity because the Greek Sacred Brigade on Samos was never actually brought into the battle. During the first few weeks there was an outbreak of fever among the British troops and some of the men fell ill. For the most part though, the men were digging in and finding shelter and ensuring they had food supplies which were coming in on the ships and ammunition for the regiments. Most of you will recognise this. And most Larians here will know of the disastrous attack that happened with the sinking of the Greek destroyer on Queen Olga on the 26th of September. It was a magnificent ship used by the Hellenic Navy, and they assisted in moving British troops from where they'd been training and moving supplies, and they were working very close together, the British Navy, the Hellenic Navy and the British Navy. For Ted Johnson, it was his first fatality of the war with the sinking of the Olga. He told me, my first casualty on Leros was a Greek sailor who was killed on Olga. I helped pull him out of the water, and he'd been down there for a bit. It was a pretty gruesome sight. And when people are telling me that, you can imagine how it felt to know this man's story, and it brings a real punch of reality to what actually happened. The British destroyer Intrepid also went down that same night. The Greeks and the British were joined now in their determination as common fighters in a battle against the Germans. Once the bombing started, it was to become relentless until the end of the battle. Meanwhile, on the night of the 23rd and 4th of October, east of Kalymnos, around midnight, disaster struck again with the sinking of HMS Eclipse. This had been, the ship had been hit by a mine and it went down within 3 minutes. It was carrying not only vital equipment and supplies to the island, but it was also bringing with it a company, a part of HQ company of the Buffs. Stanley Froud, he was with the Buffs, was on board when the detonation hit the ship under her forward boiler room, setting the fuel tanks ablaze. She immediately took a heavy list and completely broke in two. Then I actually managed to find this painting of the sinking of the HM Eclipse from the Imperial War Museum. But this man, Stan Froud, recalled what actually happened because he'd been on the deck of that ship. I was standing on deck with my best friend Jack Hawkes and the other boys, and that was it. I didn't know anymore. I woke up and all I saw was flames in my eyes and everything was still. My legs were caught in the wires going round the boat. My back was towards the edge of the destroyer, and as she turned, I went down with her. Strangely, it felt kind of peaceful. Then I don't know if I kicked or what, but I came to the surface, about 100 yards from the destroyer. I saw her turn over, and the screws or the propellers were still going fast as she went down, speeding her going down. Of the 200 Buffs on board, 134 perished, along with another 119 Navy personnel. Now this, you probably know the map of Leros, but it's not come out very well, and I apologise for this. Brigadier Tilney arrived to take charge of the British battalion on the 5th of November. Once the reinforcements were in place, he placed the Buffs up in north, and most of you who know Leros will know the sort of areas. So the Buffs were up on Clevey and around that area. The Royal Irish Fusiliers were in the centre, and a lot of them were sent to fight on Apatici, Mount Apatici. The unit of Royal West Kent came under the control of the King's Own, and most of the King's Own was sent to the bottom. And that's all sort of a rather confined way of putting it, but it's the best way I can explain how Brigadier Tilney had actually placed each of these platoons. There's also a mobile reserve in the north. However, there wasn't much transport, so it wasn't very mobile, which didn't help matters. Fortress HQ, as some of you I'm sure will know, is in the centre at Charing Cross. The lack of transport hindered mobility, and the only heavy anti-aircraft guns, as I said, were those by the Italians. But at this time, by November the 5th, there were around 2,000 British soldiers, not including the Royal West Kent, ready for action, made up of 500 Royal Irish Fusiliers, 450 King's Own, 360 Buffs, and 100 long-range desert groups and special boat squadron men, 100 Royal Indian Army Service Corps, and a lot of people don't remember that there were actually Indians here serving in the British Army, plus battery regiments and various signal sappers and miners. There was also, at that time, my source says anything between 2,000 and 5,000 Italians who were here. But this is one of the problems with different sources.
This is the official source, and it's exactly 8,321 people.
Just in Leros?
Exactly.
Not soldiers though? No.
All together. Soldier and Navy and
And this is
the
this.
civilian.
This is one of the problems when you're looking at sources, though, because you actually do. People say, "Well, how many were here and what time?" And you get different in different reports. You get different amounts of you get different numbers. This is the map of the geographical section of the British War Department on the day of the battle. The first landings were made on the 12th of November 1943 at around 6 a.m. simultaneously at Pas de Dissopa and Griffo Bay in the northeast with around 500 German troops. Another landing was made just around Pandeli at the base of Mount Apatigi with around 120 German soldiers. The Buffs and the long-range desert group did their best to hold them down in the north, while the Germans were making straight up Mount Clevey in the north and Vendetta, a difficult rocky climb over up the mountain. A couple of attempts were also made to landing at Palmer Bay, which is a bit further north towards the Footy, and on Gorner on the other side, but these were successfully seen off. This is another map that shows, but again, it's not too clear. I don't know why the maps haven't come out too well. So you can see that there's also an invasion coming in from Gorner Angle and further up around what they call Palmer Bay. This is Leonard Marcel Gander. He was the war correspondent for the Daily Telegraph newspaper in Britain. He'd gone out to report on the battle when he heard it was about to begin. He witnessed the events and reported back on what he saw. At about 2 p.m. that same afternoon of the 12th of November, there was a parachute drop of nearly 500 German paratroopers. And this is what Gander recalled. As I watched, fascinated, something white appeared under the fuselage of the leading machine. It bellied out into a great mushroom, beneath which the dark figure of the parachutist looked small and helpless. Then came another and another, 15 altogether, most with grey parachutes. The first man, who was probably the group leader, had touched the ground before the machine gunners on the sides of the Meraviglia had recovered from the paralysing shock of surprise. Then began a wild outburst of firing from the ground till the air was crisscrossed with red tracer dashes spurting from 20 directions. Many of the parachutes fell to their deaths on the rocks, in the sea, or were shot down as they fell. But enough survived to make a difference, and the main landing was sort of along Ratchy Ridge, and they joined up with the Germans who landed by the sea. The details of the battle are told in my book through the eyes of the British soldiers. It was a time of great confusion. A lot of people, a lot of the British soldiers just didn't know where they were on the island. There was vicious hand-to-hand fighting and deaths by German sniper fire. This was going on under constant bombing, no air cover for the Allies, continual breakdowns in communications as lines were cut and men were killed. I'm going to tell a couple of stories for my Italian friends here. This is the stories that I caught about Italians. The Italian soldiers had been trapped between the Allies and the Axis. Thousands of them had been abandoned after the surrender on various islands, told by the Italian governor to swap sides in the middle of the war. Having fought for the Germans, they now had to fight for the British. Some of them gave up, quite rightly as far as I'm concerned, and sang opera. However, Anthony Martin Greenwood told me, he's related a story. He was the head of the artillery division of the long-range desert group, and he'd been put in charge of the Italian gunners. He recalled how all the guns were completely out of calibration, and it was unsurprising they were missing their shots. So he went round to the enemy emplacements and ensured that they were all aligned. The first Italian took his shot and missed. This was the German airplanes coming over. They realigned, and he took another shot. It was a direct hit, and the plane came down in smoke. A roar of cheering went up, and Italians appeared from nowhere, full of congratulations. They decided to throw a party and went back to one of their houses. It was well furnished with carpets and quite luxurious. Women came out of the background to join them, and liquor was pulled out. Such was their celebratory spirit. However, Greenwood also said this was typical of the southern Italians, The Northern gunners are much more hardened and better fighters, according to him. And he backed the tale up by saying one gun officer, Capitano Cacciatore from the Italian battery, was regaled for his bravery. He joined Brigade HQ after his guns had been destroyed. When the Germans began to ascend Meravidia, he charged down the hill at them, throwing his hand grenades. When he ran out of hand grenades, he pulled his gun and started shooting at them. When his gun was empty, he started picking up rocks and throwing rocks at the enemy. He lost an arm and was wounded in the face and legs and his side, but luckily we hear that he made good progress later and survived. After tremendous fighting on both sides, Brigadier Tilney surrendered the island, and again, the times that I've been given, and I've read a lot of the war reports, it's not just, sorry, can we close the door? Thanks. The times range anything from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon of the 16th of September to 6:30 in the evening. But it was that afternoon that the Brigadier Tilney found himself surrounded by Germans, and a lot of the people I interviewed said just because he was surrounded by Germans, the chain of command should have gone, that he should have passed on to his deputy, which didn't happen. All the men I interviewed said Tilney was not up for the job. They never forgave him for surrendering, but I think in reality, Tilney probably surrendered to save further loss of life. On the 21st of November, Churchill wrote to Anthony Eden, the Foreign Secretary, expressing his sadness at the loss of life and the loss of Leros. He said, "No attempt should be made to minimise the poignance of the loss of the Dodecanese, which we had a chance of getting so easily at so little cost, and which we have now lost after heavy expenditure." Meanwhile, General Muller had no problems posing in front of Villa Bellini as in his victory pose. The villa had actually been used as a makeshift hospital during the battles. The prisoners first assembled in Olinda, and then some were were assembled in a marina, and eventually they were all sent to Portolago. Churchill contemplated that the British had probably downed 2,000 Germans on the way, but the enemy now had 3,000 prisoners of war. He estimated the British losses to be about 5,000 men. The number of injured and dead became evident as the battle drew to a close. One man I interviewed, Paddy McChrystal, was a young private in the Royal Irish Fusiliers, and he was near to tears when he recalled the roll call of lost comrades. The commanding officer, we called him Mickey French. His brother George was there. He was killed too. McAllister was one of those injured. Jesus wept. Matheson, O'Connell, the two brothers, they were sergeants, all killed. Paddy himself was hit in the head with a large piece of shrapnel, leaving a scar he would bear for the rest of his life. He ended up in the hospital in the prisoner of war camp for 3 or 4 months. After the surrender, the Special Boat Squadron and the Long-Range Desert Group desperately tried to get people off the island. Anybody who wasn't taken prisoner of war, and a lot of the people I interviewed gave me some fantastic Great Escape stories, better than the film. These were 2 of those who actually escaped on what were called fold boats, folding boats that the SBS had used. Clifford Clark and his sergeant, George Hatcher. Once they got to Portolago, they had to move quite carefully in case any Germans were patrolling the vicinity. All seemed clear. Hatcher recalled, though, that it was pitch black, so you couldn't see anything. And it was, as they went out to sea, there was completely no light at all. Hatcher recalled, we went out on the wide open sea, and were wide open for any attack. As we were rowing, we suddenly saw a small German convoy going into the harbour. We all had to sit still and hold our breath and stop rowing and hope they didn't see us. Luckily, they didn't. And these men ended up on Lipsey on the way to Turkey. because the British had got like a rat run going up around Turkey, and they could find their way back to Britain. But they all remember the assistance that the Lerians and the Lipsey people gave to them in their attempts to escape. Those who could not get off the island were taken prisoner on cattle trains to various detention camps, where they stayed until the end of the war. This photo was taken in Stalag 7A at Leros, showing British prisoners of war talking to new inmates captured in Leros. Every one of the soldiers I interviewed was against the surrender and would have kept fighting. And the German account seems to bear this out. They thought that they might win. I found General Muller's account. He gave an interim report, and he admitted on the 14th of November, it appeared to be almost impossible that we should ever win the battle. The destiny of the troops on Leros hang on a thin thread. The British magazine The Spectator, the 19th of November 1943, gave a scathing verdict on the Aegean events in an editorial entitled The Sacrifice of Leros. Public opinion will not be satisfied until the whole question of Kos, Leros and Samos has been cleared up, it demanded. After days of heroic resistance in which 3,000 British troops and 5,000 Italians received and deserved public admiration for holding on against perpetually reinforced German troops and mass bombing against which there was no protection, we now learn that the inevitable has happened, that the garrison has been overwhelmed and the island lost. The numbers: 183 British and Commonwealth soldiers lie in Leros Cemetery. 153, mainly buffs, drowned in the sinking of the Eclipse. The Germans suffered around 1,109 casualties out of their 4,500 troops. One source reckons out of 525 Italian officers on Leros, about 50 died in combat and about 440 were shot by Germans. This is just the officers. The British prisoners numbered approximately 200 officers and 3,000 men of other rankings. The Italian prisoners of war numbered 350 officers and 5,000 other rankings. Reports were heard of the cruel treatment of the Italians by the Germans. The story has long circulated in Leros, that some of you have probably heard, that at least one boat full of Italians that had set out from Pandeli was intentionally scuppered by German fire coming from the shore. For the men who fought for Leros, though, it was to become one of the most significant and certainly the most tragic story of their lives. For those of us who remained, let us remember those who fought so bravely for a democracy we cherished on the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Leros. My friend, a 96-year-old Leros vet, emailed me today, hoping that things go well and that people would remember those who died on Leros, quoting a poem. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
Ringraziamo Giulio per la sua presentazione, per questo libro. It is another point of view. Did you see, for example, official paper and historic normally is exactly, but historical paper can change in function. Last year we presented an Italian book about Battle of Leros. Was the grande testimonianza. It was the people who was the chief of all the battle around Leros. So we have a different point of view. We will see at the 26th September when we have the 75th anniversary.
But this is what is important, is to have all the different points of view.
Exactly.
Because as a historian, I know there is no one history. Every man told me slightly different stories. The Italians have their story, the Germans have their story, the British have, and each story needs to be told.
But I think how to confront, put one in front of the other, what we know, what they know. So thank you very much for
Can I just say, before people go, there's a Greek version coming up, and hopefully I can give a Greek presentation next year for any of your Greek friends. Also, if the books run out, which I'm hoping they might, I'm hoping that I can actually have another sale. Jan will take numbers and things, and I'll bring another lot over in August for the one.
So next year that you're gonna represent the Greek edition of the book.
Next year, I hope.
You're gonna represent it in Greek.
In Greek
You have to improve your Greek.
In Greek yourself.
Thank you for coming out.
Hello, cosa posso fare?